Hey folks, I'm Maggie. I'm the Community Product Manager for Data Hub. Super excited to announce that we are kicking off a new series called DDL, or Decoding Data Leadership. And this will be talking with data leaders from across the world, across industries, talking about the big challenges that we face, how we tackle them, and the lessons we learn along the way. In this first episode, we'll be hearing from former leaders of Airbnb's data organization. We'll hear everything about how they approach data democratization, to rolling out open source projects like Airflow and Superset. Also get some practical advice about building a data team, how to think through kind of structuring the team within an organization, and also how to start to build or gain some political capital so you can go on to solve some really big data challenges. I know that I personally learned a ton from this conversation, and I know that you will too. So kick back, enjoy the episode, and let us know what you think.
Hello, everyone. I'm Swaroop. I'm the co-founder of a company called Actual Data, and I've had the pleasure of working with this amazing set of folks here who were all at Airbnb at a time when the data culture was really built and many great things happened in terms of how data was actually used for business value, in terms of the amazing open source projects that came out of it, in terms of how data education was pioneered, and best practices in experimentation. There's so many things, and I frequently talk to data leaders and practitioners out there who keep citing all these blogs and products that we've developed, and they want to absorb the best parts of it into their own organization. So the idea here is to kind of get together and talk about things that went well and what are still applicable as we navigate the modern world, and I'm actually very bullish on how the whole data industry is trending in spite of all the noise. I think it's great that people are taking data very seriously and consider it as a strategic business asset now. And I think there are opportunities to inform everyone the challenges that we faced and how they continue to persist, and then generally hear your outlook on where you see the industry going in the next 5 years. So that's the overall goal here. Let's start with quick intros. I did a brief intro about myself just to complete that a little bit. Actual Data drives the open source Data Hub project in collaboration with LinkedIn. Data Hub is deployed in hundreds of companies now out there. We also build a SaaS product to commercialize it. I'll keep it brief for now, and I'll just go in the order of the faces that I see on my grid here. Che, I'll go with you first.
All right. Hey, y'all. Good seeing you again. My name is Che. I'm CEO at Epo, where we're building a next-gen experimentation framework, heavily inspired by the tool we had at Airbnb and the other similar types of tools we've seen otherwise. So I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot more into experimentation and infra and why you do it later on. So I'll just pause here and let y'all introduce yourself.
Max, you're next on my screen.
All right, I'm Max. I'm CEO and founder at Preset. I'm really excited to be sitting in the same virtual room as the folks here today. I think it's the first time we're all together since probably 2017, at least. I don't think we've all chatted together since that time. I think we've all stayed connected and had a bunch of conversation individually, but it's good to see these people in the room together. I'm the original creator of Apache Airflow. I joined Airbnb in 2014, and I started working on Airflow right at that time. About a year later, I started Apache Superset. And then, since then, about a few years back, I started a company called Preset, so where we offer a managed service around Apache Superset, which is a data visualization, data consumption tool, very much like the visualization layer for the modern data stack. So who's up next? Lindsay, you want to go next? Lindsay.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay? I've got some Wi-Fi issues. We're good? Awesome. Great. Yeah, so awesome to see everyone. My name's Lindsay, CEO and founder of a company called Iggy, which was very much inspired by things we didn't have at Airbnb while I was there. So what Iggy does is we help folks build better products and models with location data. And yeah, I'm sure I'll talk more about it, but yeah, fantastic to see everyone in one place. And yeah, what a set of people. So can't wait to see what we get into today.
And finally, Mr. James Mayfield.
Hi, all. Just to echo what I think everybody said, it is so good to see you all. I have such fond memories of working with each of you. And it's pretty amazing to see how many of us went on to start companies or become founders at companies across the data space. So I am COO and co-founder of Transform Data. We are a metrics store. I'm sure we'll talk more about what that means and the inspiration for really consolidating much of the work on data and infrastructure at Airbnb towards metrics and how that actually played out in the long term, the good, the bad, and the ugly of those decisions. So I feel like I also helped recruit Max to join Airbnb, and I feel like I also helped get Swaroop signed up on the door. So maybe I'm part of the glue that holds this whole thing together, and I am like very, very excited to be chatting through this with all of you.
I have to jump in and say, I remember my first conversation with Che. Che, I don't know if you remember, but I was like being recruited out of Insight, and we were up in 888 on the 4th floor, like having drinks. And yeah, definitely remember that conversation. So it's interesting, right? In terms of the culture that we all became a part of, and I'm sure which we like brought to our own companies.
Awesome. So one thing that I fondly look back on is, of course, the people and the amazing things that we did, but the actual business value that we delivered from data was tremendous when you actually look back now. Meaning, in the middle of it all, maybe it didn't feel like that sometimes, but somehow we got data democracy right, and we had a strong culture of realizing value from data in the pockets where it mattered. And it was done with a combination of having a solid platform and amazing tooling that came out, which became open source projects, and data education, and having the right team structure even. So I just want us to talk through these layers of the cake. Like, let's start with the the foundation, the culture, and the people, and what was needed to achieve that data democracy. I'll just randomly start. Like, Che, if you want to start.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I actually think a starting point is the company's bones, right? Like the business model, travel marketplace, right? That has a lot of characteristics that lends itself to certain types of data work, probably a lot more economics minded with a supply demand concept and matching and all that. And also its founder is founded by designers, right? That's novel. I think that's pretty unusual in terms of we weren't just building stuff, we also had to win over a culture. So I think that's kind of some background setting. I think the data teams start mostly as a function of the people you hire. And I think, as we all know, Riley was the first hire, and that kind of had a lot of kind of cascading effects downstream. To me, the greatest thing about that is that Riley was intensely focused on impact. He might not have run large data infra teams at a place like a Facebook yet, but he was very focused on actually delivering business value and picking up stuff along the way. And even as we fought through different challenges, I think that James, I don't know if he was the one who recruited you, but I think he found the right people to kind of make the vision come live, especially right around that kind of 2013, 2014 pivot point. So there's a lot more to say about that, but I'll pause there. I think it's worth talking at the starting point is that we were a marketplace, which made certain things like North Star metrics a lot more easy. We were a consumer business, which made data volumes much higher. We had a little bit more executive sponsorship because our first hire was a top first 10 employee. And we brought in some of the best minds of the previous generation data teams, like James and Max and everyone on this call. So,
one big thing too is having the resources, right? You need the cash and the venture and the capital to go and hire, to just grow the scale of a data platform team, data engineering team to the scale that we had to. So the key ingredient there is the success of Airbnb at the time too, and the capacity to go and hire the folks from a bunch of places and give them like pretty loose guidelines. Like, you know, I remember a fair amount of freedom. Like, hey, you guys know, like Riley didn't necessarily know very much exactly what we had to build. It was like, you guys know better. You came from bigger, greater places that have, you know, you've seen it before, you've seen the future, bring that future here. And they were very supportive, I think, of open source too, which I think that was one of the key ingredients there in terms of like just my own like drive and motivation came largely from the fact that the impact was not limited to Airbnb, it was just like limited to the world too. So I was like full speed, like very, very excited to come and work on open source.
Lindsay, I think you kind of were in growth at a very interesting time when that was probably the most data intensive parts of the company where experimentation was huge. And like, maybe you can talk us through the culture aspects that related to that before we get into tooling and all that.
Sure, yeah. So let's see, I got hired at the end of 2014, started 2015. So super exciting time, right? ERF was, you know, had been kicked off, but I think the usage of it was like kind of scattered and clustered, right? And
people might not know what ERF is. It's like very much
yeah.
a internal term, but yeah, experimentation reporting framework, I believe.
Yeah, right. Who knew, right? We never used it. I mean, we used it, just not, we never used all the words. Yeah, so, I mean, God, it was wild at the time. So this is my first industry job. I came straight from a PhD in politics, actually. So, you know, had sort of exposure to the econometric side of things. And, you know, no one told me about ERF. I didn't know that that's what I'd be, you know, able to and Airflow at the same time, right? Sort of separate conversation. But, you know, we did a number of things on the growth team that I think really like jump-started how experimentation took off. So we did fun things like we started like experiment review, a weekly experiment review on the growth team where, you know, we'd have an hour and a half, folks would sign up to discuss an experiment, right? It always had to be really hypothesis driven, right? They'd lead with a hypothesis. They'd bring screenshots of ERF. They'd talk about, you know, surprises or bugs or challenges. And, you know, there were always sort of like action items, like, you know, we're going to stop this experiment. We're going to move forward. Here's how we're going to change it. And man, people just loved it, right? It was like an awesome way to empower, particularly, I think, young engineers to, you know, take ownership and socialize what they were working on, to get feedback. So yeah, that was, you know, that was my first year at the company. And it was just so exciting to see the enthusiasm. Like a couple months in, the experiment review sessions would just be booked out, right? Like everyone wanted to talk about their experiments. And I think, you know, that's a sign that, you know, there was so much potential, so much support. And then, you know, you guys can talk more closely about this, but then, you know, it invited interesting challenges of scale, right? Like, you know, I remember like losing sleep one night because you used to be able to take down ERF with like a bad metric. You know, the whole pipeline would stop and I would just be like, Max, I think I did it again, you know? So anyway, lots to talk about there, but super exciting time and awesome to, you know, be a part of helping it grow, right? Both on the sort of evangelism side, but then obviously on the sort of metrics and data side.
Cool. James, I want to get to like the tooling and metrics layer and all of that in a bit, but I actually wanted to talk to you about the data education piece, which you drove earlier on, which is actually an underappreciated aspect of what happened at Airbnb in terms of the multitude of stakeholders actually using all the amazing tools that we built. You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. And I can't take all the credit for this. I actually think a lot more credit goes to Riley and the data scientists who pushed forward a lot of the data education, and Jeff Fung as well. Oh yeah, Max, your shirt was blurry, but it showed up there for a second. You know, my whole thing was, yeah, Erin Kaufman for sure. Huge part of that.
Erin Kaufman, yes.
She was just like a naturally gifted teacher, which I think made that even better for folks. And the education for me was, if you built a tool, me as a product manager, and I know I pushed everyone on this call in different ways on this, and I always came back to, like, if you built a tool, are people actually using it? How often are they using it? What is your weekly active user percentage of total addressable market, internally? And I think that as a PM in the technical space, it was really my job to be trying to get everyone into that user-oriented mindset. And that would absolutely not have been possible without the education efforts. Just handing somebody a tool that is an interface to a SQL database, right, is not enough. Go teach them how to use it, teach them how to export, teach them how to take a CSV file and turn it into Excel and make it useful. If you're going to give people an experimentation reporting framework, it has to be rock solid. And we certainly had our bumps in the early days. And then once it got to be rock solid, exactly what Lindsay was describing, the data scientist picking it up and saying, hey, this is our culture. This is our tool, and we're going to use it, and we're going to educate each other on how to use it, and we're going to make this like a part of our product development lifecycle. Connecting that all the way through, it was almost like in it. Now that I'm learning about this from the business side, this is almost like your customer success. You can build a great tool, but you have to have customer success to teach and train and educate and get your users to provide feedback and to improve the tools and have a virtuous cycle there. And then also, like, the job isn't done at the moment the tool is created. The job is only done when people are using it and finding true value in it. That's really what I learned internally from that I then brought externally into my new role. I bet you guys did too.
Yeah, I think a big thing was, kind of second shot effect, or like third or fourth shot. So I think like we had seen good from different places before. So people coming from LinkedIn, Facebook, other places in the Valley, I'd seen, tools that had been successful in those places. And then we took what was best from these ideas and then reinvented those in a better way, right? Maybe the first experiment, the second experiment is not always like the perfect tool, but then we all had a shot to do it one more time. And I think that was a big thing. One thing I wanted to mention too, that was like magical things happening too on the culture side. Like first there was cookies every day. There's a little cart coming with fresh baked cookies that were baked by the culinary team. I think it was at like 3 p.m. every day. Little happy joy cart of cookies that helps the morale of the troops. And then I remember this thing, and I've never seen anything like that in other work environments, like before or after that. People would just like suddenly start cheering and clapping for unknown reasons. And it would go like, it would storm around the office. The office is gigantic and kind of open space, but kind of a big like square with a hole in the middle. But then you would just hear this like cheer roaring and like kind of coming from other department. Maybe a team was celebrating something, a birthday, a product achievement, or like who knows what. And it would just like go like a wave through the office, and then people would stand up and start clapping, and then go back to work.
I always thought there was a San Francisco thing coming from the suburbs until I realized, no, this is just an Airbnb thing.
I don't know. Yeah, have you seen that anywhere else? I haven't seen that. That was insane. But there was like a lot of cool stuff happening. It just felt great to be there. You'd wake up like excited to go to work and work on things, and then with really good like coworkers, smart people, like driven. It was awesome times.
Yeah, and cool. one thing I wanted to just add there, was, and I know Che, you can, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, but like, how much we were all learning together, right? Like, okay, so when ERF launched, it was, oh, we can do two-tailed tests, and then, eventually we were doing, I never know what to call it, Cupid, right? Which, variance reduction techniques, and we were doing like, in ERF dimensional splits of our data, right? To see breakdowns in certain regions or certain devices. Initially we had to write these scripts in R and do this like ugly stuff, right? To report to our product teams. I worked on the China team. So what was going on in China, right? Like we didn't have a cut for country level. We didn't have a cut for device level. And it was exciting at the time, a little frustrating, right? Because folks would be like, what's a p-value, right? To walk them through, and people were peaking and like announcing victory on things, and like it was so like simultaneously like energizing and frustrating and challenging. And like I think one of the biggest legacies from Airbnb is all of us founded companies where like, it was great to go through that together, but the next company doesn't have to, right? Like that was a great journey. And like, now let us bring it to you, right? So yeah, really grateful for that.
I want to talk about a few more concrete things as we move up the cake there. First, of course, we built a very scalable platform. Blog posts have been written about it, and streaming and all that good stuff happened. We actually built a really solid foundation. And then we, built amazing products like Airflow, Superset, Experimentation, Minerva. And I want us to talk about some of these tools, and I'm going to obviously pick on the respective people for those. And Lindsay, I want us to discuss a little bit about usage of geodata in pricing and ranking and so on. So we'll get to that in a bit, but obviously, Che, please talk us through all the amazing things we did with experimentation, the mixed group problem and Cupid blog posts. Like there have been so many things that came out of Airbnb. Just talk us through what was so amazing about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we also, like you mentioned before, we should present this with a little bit of humble pie here, right? Like it wasn't all perfect. And especially on the time scale, companies founded, 2008, Riley hired 2010, I joined 2012. Like ERF can be in 2014 or something, right? So there's a lot of years to get there. And by the time we got to ERF, we had basically already won a cultural battle to some extent. And we had justified a whole data org and all this. I think especially for any audience of this thing, there's a lot of 5-person data teams out there who got started because of basic reporting needs and are trying to figure out how to get to this other level of sophistication. And with that regard, I feel like an undertold story, James, I know you remember this. Part of the reason we built ERF is because an executive from Booking.com came by Airbnb and with a sort of NDA thing that made him be careful of language. And he basically in front of JoBot, in front of the whole product team was like, hypothetically, if I was in charge of Airbnb, I would build an incredibly sophisticated, powerful experimentation framework. And that's what I would do, hypothetically, or whatever, right? And that was the big political buy-in to go invest a ton here, in addition to Jan and the search and marketplace, Jan and Bar and the search and marketplace team having some early success. So I feel like when I talk to other data leaders, just purely on how do you operate as a data leader, it's you have to deliver, you have to win political capital and get wins before you start doing all the crazy sophisticated stuff. And that's changing a little bit because now there's a lot of data, so I think you can start off right away there, but especially in a recession, it's going to become that much more clear. So, what I'll say is what I think we did really well at Airbnb was one, hire really great communicators early on, because if your infrastructure is really bad early on, it's good that you can just have someone that you really respect that can communicate with you really well and kind of be a trusted ally, even amidst some infra issues. Two, if you talk to a lot of people from, again, the last generation of data teams, having joined in 2012, I really think data at Airbnb was fundamentally different before and after James and Max joining. Between Airflow arriving and core data being established, that was a true before after of the team. And just having really entrepreneurial people, because the first 5-10 data scientists, we weren't directed to where the oil in the ground was, right? You have to go out and find it, get a bunch of wins, and then you get to hire data infra teams and build ERF and all this sort of stuff. So I'm not sure that was exactly answering the question, but I just want to make sure we cover the path to get these things.
Cool. Let's keep moving. So Max, talk us through the genesis of, now famous tools, but back in the day, I remember 4 of us standing and deciding on the name of Airflow. Workflow and Airbnb should be called Airflow. That's how I think we ended up. But let's talk us through how it's grown beyond your wildest imagination.
Yeah, it's when I joined too, I'm trying to remember my impressions to when I first joined. It was very small. It was fairly small team. So data platform was pretty small. And then data engineering was a handful of people. It was not called data engineering. They called themselves Etlians, ETLENs. And then they were working on something they call core data, which was this effort around like, oh, let's, organize our core data sets in one place so that we can all agree on, metrics and dimensions. And it was like some star schema type approach to data engineering. And what I remember is, like, coming from Facebook, I just thought that the data was so small. I was like, oh my God, this is like, I felt like I had the wings, like, I've been training, a really tough, like, high gravity environment, and now you're in a zero gravity environment. We could rebuild the entire warehouse in like a few hours. And, and the platform was solid for the amount of data that we had, because Airbnb is like, we don't, there's not that many bookings, and the traffic on the website is just not that crazy at least compared to a Facebook, coming from Facebook. But then there was not a lot of glue, and stuff was not working super well, when I joined. So like, one thing, as a data engineer, we had something called Chronos that was a scheduler on top of Mesos, and I was kind of hard to use. And I was coming from Facebook, where I was a big user of Data Swarm. That was an internal tool that I used and I'd contributed to. And kind of pushed its boundaries too. So I was like, if I ever have to rebuild something like this Swarm, I really know how to do it, and I will do it much better, and I will open source it. And then I kind of joined Airbnb on that premise too, that I would get to work on that. It was not going to be like, I didn't get hired to work on Airflow, but it was going to be okay for me to work on Airflow. And then I started working on it in between jobs and put it on my own open source, like my own GitHub, so no one could kind of question the decision. I wouldn't have to jump through it. It's like, I already started, it's already kind of working. So I came in and I already had a prototype after like a 2 weeks break where I've been working on the thing. And I worked very closely with, like, the adoption was really easy because there was some pain with the current system, but also like people wanted this renewal. We just had this mindset of like, hey, we're building everything new, and I'm going to use your thing, use my thing. And surely we can do that. We're a little delusional in a really good way too, right? I think you need that. The history of invention is paved with people who are delusional, right? Like, you need to be crazy enough to think you can do better than whatever exists or whatever doesn't exist. So, so that was kind of the story of Airflow is like, very quickly, like within months, we had things in production, and we used it for core data, and then core CS, which is the customer success stuff. And then really just like really good adoption. And then Tableau was kind of pain in the butt because we didn't have a Presto driver for it. It was really hard to, like, we had made a huge investment in Presto and Hive, and we're making an investment in Druid, and we just couldn't connect Tableau directly to it. Live mode didn't work, and then those extracts is just like a really shitty database, or at least it was at the time. So decided to start building Superset as something that would connect directly and natively to these databases and just be lightweight, and also like largely inspired by similar tools that had been built at Facebook, where I came from. It was something called Unidash or something. Actually, James was directly, it was the PM for something called HiPal, and something, what was the little graphing tool again?
Scuba,
but there was Scuba, but then there was another little charting.
Argus.
Yeah, Argus, HiPal, and then Unidash was kind of taking shape as I left Facebook. But like, this delusion, it didn't seem that delusional to build something like that, because we were coming from a place where things like that got built every day. Like multiple of these things got built, every quarters, and then some things would emerge. My dogs are barking. It's probably the sign for me to stop talking and pass it over to the next person. But like, yeah, these things like took off internally. There was such a hunger for data. I think based on the people we hired and the sponsorship and the executive sponsorship, the education program, that these tools were just like taken off internally. Like, adoption seemed like a breeze, though we did. I remember I would give sessions on like we had data universities that every 2 weeks or every month, we had a cohort of like new employees getting trained at data university. So I remember doing a lot of teaching. I remember doing a lot of like data doctors too. So kind of office hours where we have like, we'd all put like white gowns, like we're working a hospital. And then there would be like little signs on the table. Here's the Airflow table, the Superset table, the ERF table. And we'd all go there and kind of help each other, and people would come and visit with their use case and their questions, and we'd unblock them. I thought that was super great.
Awesome. So there were a lot of great things about Airbnb culture, but one thing I did not like is the engineering promotion culture. And I can't believe how long it took me to get Max promoted to the highest levels in spite of all this amazing impact. I just hated that part about Airbnb engineering culture. But anyway, moving on, Lindsay, you saw a lot of firsthand, use of high value geo data being used very strategically in pricing and ranking. And what did you see then, and what are you seeing? I mean, is the industry still missing some tricks, or talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Like, I mean, this is what really pushed me to found my company, was like, the amount of energy, well, taking a step back, right? Like Airbnb's sort of native data models were rooted in the listing, right? Like, which made sense. It's the data that the hosts have, that no one really had access to. I don't think anyone at Airbnb knew about the MLS, like the multiple listing service, which is used in real estate, So, we had all this great like user generated content and buried in reviews and photos, and listing descriptions was like a lot of great information about, not just listings themselves, but like the context of the listing. And, there were various projects I worked on to like kind of surface that data, right? Like if I wanted to run a marketing campaign on the growth team to all of the hosts who had Airbnbs on the beach, like that didn't exist, right? We had user generated content, so we could like kind of dig it out. But, massive, I don't know, I kind of saw it as a massive problem and opportunity. And, when I left Airbnb, as we all did, right? The first thing is like, well, is this idea crazy? Got to do my customer discovery and see like, is this a problem and an opportunity that exists elsewhere? And, indeed it is, right? It took 5 minutes into conversations with, folks at Zillow and Trulia and Redfin and Booking.com and, all these great companies in travel and real estate, and realizing that like, sure, every once in a while you get entrepreneurial folks who are, kind of unearthing these insights in geospatial data, but the amount of work it takes is it's excruciating, right? Like sourcing this data independently, right? We had some in reviews, but again, it was selected data, so we didn't have the coverage that we needed. And yeah, it's a really common problem. And as I keep saying, like, a pretty interesting opportunity, I think, for, anyone in real estate and travel to leverage more outside data sources. I think the irony of so many data teams is that they're so focused on, this maybe it's not an irony, but like they're so focused on their data, their reporting, right, about their product, about their revenue, and all of that makes sense. But I think particularly if you're in, the kind of business where location matters, which for like real estate and travel, like location is number one, right? There aren't necessarily good tools that exist to serve those use cases. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if you all have been following, but Andrew from, former Coursera, Google, et cetera, he's on this big kick now for like data-centric AI, right? It's like, let's move away from the like all the tuning, we've gotten that taken care of, right? Like you can figure that out. Let's actually return to like data quality. And I mean, I'm sure that's something we all have opinions on, but that's one way that I think about the work that we're doing with Iggy is like, just making more data accessible to more product teams and ML teams, because, Airbnb is doing great things with their category search, but, the ability to do that is something that like really any company that deals with location should be able to. So yeah, super fascinating.
The state of open data is not what it should be, right? Like if you want to like run a query of like population per zip code somewhere, maybe now on like open data sets on that BigQuery is putting forward, like maybe some of the super basic like demographic stuff is there, but it's crazy how open source code is so advanced. Like you think of the number of like libraries and products and frameworks that exist, and then you think about like how hard it is to just get like population by city or I don't know, just weather data like through a simple not API but like through like scans too. So like I called it the denominator problem too on like geospatial stuff at Lyft too. We had this issue of like, hey, we have a lot of rides in this area. To know if it's good, we need to know like what is the denominator, like how big is this market, in theory, and we need to go get that external information to put our data in context too.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head in that there's a lot of like, and this is what I did at Airbnb. It's a lot of like one-off analytic stuff, right? Like that you can do, but actually also bring this data into production is a whole different challenge, right? Like, and that to me was one of the best things about working at Airbnb was exposure to production systems, right? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. It's not just access to the data. It's, because we give away a lot of data for free, but once you have it, like, how do you actually get it to speak to your BI tools, right? How do you get it to speak to, your ML system so you can actually take it, into account when you're building? So lots of opportunity left.
One thing I wanted to discuss is we had this air/data thing, data portal, which really democratized everything in terms of how anyone can access anything. We had experimentation framework, but I think what really brought all this alive in terms of people discovering business critical data is like the metrics, layer that came about, the Minerva thing. Obviously, there were lots of learnings from other companies in terms of how they had done it. But I felt like data portal came alive after metrics was introduced in it, and then experimentation also became a lot more reliable after you had, a consistent layer, and superset also became a lot more exciting. Like people can just spin up like various cuts. So James, maybe you can talk us through the evolution of that. We obviously, it took us a while to get to that state. We made many mistakes along the way.
Yeah, I was just thinking through that too. Sort of like, if somebody's going to listen to this podcast, what is it that we can offer them? There's a lot of intelligence and learning in this room, and I was just thinking through before you prompted this question. What is the practical advice we can offer to someone? They've created they work at some company. That company has created some data assets. Where do you start?
Yeah, I think I love this line of questioning, and just as one baseline for our starting point, like, we're living in a DBT world with Snowflake like that, so people don't have to figure out the high provisioning, whatever, right? So you got a cluster, it's elastic, you're modeling stuff, you're probably delivering core BI reports. I think you can kind of say like most were there, and it's hard to get beyond that. So like, what do you think of just using that as the starting place? Like 5-person, they got DBT, Snowflake, they're putting some Tableau dashboards up.
I want to get to that in a bit, but just want to complete that Airbnb story a little bit in terms of, rounding out the picture, and then I want to get to the, so James.
Okay. Yeah, sure. That's totally fair. So where we got to was we put together some core pieces of infrastructure. We got to a place where experimentation was a big deal, and people had really rallied around metrics for experimentation. Similar story at Facebook before that. Metrics were incredibly useful for experimentation, for having one lens onto the success and failure of an experiment. Then from there, what else are metrics useful for? Stop having to define them 2 separate places or 3 separate places, bring them all together. So the same metrics you're using for experimentation are the same metrics that you're using for validating your business performance, are the same metrics you're using for your dashboards and superset, are the same metrics you're using for our forays into anomaly detection, are the same metrics that you're using for executive reporting and daily flash emails. Creating consistency on that metrics layer, I think, was a late stage evolution that we witnessed as the logical conclusion to many of these other distributed efforts. And I think that was an important story. Then, Sarup, right to your point, how do you show that to people? The data portal was incredibly useful, but it got way more useful when metrics came to be, because most folks do not think of data in terms of tables. They do not think of core data bookings table and what is the associated metadata for that table. They just want to know how many bookings happened. How many bookings happened in China? And that is the core question that I think data portal ran into. And you can speak to that even much better than I can.
I want to be conscious of the time, so let's keep moving and bring up the question that Che brought up, and we can chat all day about, data portal, James. So, so now let's switch to the modern data stack, or postmodern data stack, or whatever you want to call it. So, we didn't get everything right at Airbnb. kind of evolved into a decentralized structure almost by force, like we ran into multiple business units. The technology stack consolidated. I think that's still true. There's a little bit of fragmentation and there's a little bit of consolidation. I feel like that's always going to be the case because can't stop innovation. We've seen this with oracles of the world and whatnot. So the key question is you just have to embrace decentralization. And there's a starter pack for data teams if you're just starting out, and then there are like big companies which are grappling with huge amounts of fragmentation. So I want to tackle like a few questions related to that. So first thing is, ownership. Let's stop there. I think we ran into huge issues there. And Che, why don't you talk about it? I think you have a position for the starter pack, as it were, and there are like bigger company problems too.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting world we live in now. I mean, we had to build all this stuff ourselves because there wasn't any good tools out there, and now there's a lot of good tools out there. But yeah, just being able to spin up basic reporting with like a small skeleton group is, I think, the default mode out there. But I think the thing that I find myself giving a lot of advice on is like, yeah, once you spin up a basic BI dashboard, like how do you get people thinking in terms of data and metrics, which gets into both the infra you invest in and organizationally how you set yourself up. I mean, I'm wondering what y'all think. I'm a big believer in the kind of embedded centralized reporting thing. So like embedded on teams, centralized, reporting structures. I think one of the things I think is like a very underrated is having all data functions report through one data org. We almost had that at Airbnb. We had a lot of data functions report through it, but we did not have like data infra report through it. And we did not have like core ML necessarily go through the data org. And so those cleavages kind of, never, I think, led to a lot of downstream consequences. And I think there are other teams with like way worse organizational setups, which is like all the BI and analytics is at a wholly separate place than like analytics engineering and data infra or whatever. And that stuff really matters. And so I would say start off there. And then 2 is like, make your early hires like essentially entrepreneurial product people, or just heavily indexed on whatever the mechanism you're trying to maximize. Maybe they're marketing people or whatever. But the point is that like they need to be almost as much practitioner as just data specialist early on, just to like get wins, understand the business, make the right choices. And then that kind of gets you the political will, the investment, everything else to then get more sophisticated stuff.
So agree with that. I think there's one painful learning that I have. I think, a bunch of us went through that too. I think, core data, like the core foundational tables got splintered and kind of moved into various business units, and people these days call it data mesh and data products and whatnot. So, but we tried to resist that, but it was just, the force was too much. And ultimately, the business units ended up owning what was closer to their logic, but we still needed some central core data tables. I feel like as an industry, we haven't really solved that problem. It's all nice to say that domains should own their data products, but what happens to certain key dimensions that matter to all business units? Who takes care of backfilling them? These problems don't magically go away. So I'm particularly interested in hearing Max and James, like you, and of course Lindsay too. So is this a solved problem today, or are people just papering over this painful problem?
I mean, it's a big company problem, right? Like the mesh, and I'm not a big proponent of like the data mesh, paper or philosophy. Like I think there's some really good ideas and some good problem statements in there too. For me, like working at a much smaller company now, I would say like if you can centralize like the data asset creation into like a kind of a crafty, small and mighty team that can manage this stuff for a while, like do that as long as you can until the forces of like decentralization becomes stronger. But one thing is there's a lot of learnings in the data world from the software engineering world, and like the microservice idea does not translate well into the data world because stuff is like much more there's much more gravitational pull to bring everything together. Everything needs to be joined and union together. So it's much harder to say like, hey, we're going to carve out a data product or a service or a microservice and then, take it out. So I think it's that part, like decentralizing or meshing data is extremely challenging, and you need to have like this tension between the centralization, right? Like people who have the same skills want to work together and be centralized, but then the product teams want to pull out. One thing that's kind of a different question I wanted to explore is like, what if in 2014, when I joined Airbnb, or like right around the time where we invested big in data, what if we had everything we have today? What if we had Snowflake BigQuery? What if we had, Airflow and DBT laying around? What if we could, just become customers of preset transform and all the companies that Acro, like other companies who are, what would we have done then, right? Is a really interesting questions. And I don't think we would have invested as much in data platform. That would have been just like, things we would have purchased. And then I think we would have gone to product teams to help them. Like the data people, like I would have picked a team, like the bookings team or the, like pick a vertical team and get closer to them and do some data work with them and for them with like driving business outcomes, as opposed to like working on centralizing infrastructure pieces to support the rest of the company. But it's kind of an interesting question. Like, what would we do if we had all these tools around,
I'll tell you something that happened after all you folks left and I was the last remaining person at Airbnb. I lived through, pre-IPO readiness, very close to it, and I lived through COVID hitting the company. The problems of getting ready for compliance, GDPR, and when COVID happened, the amount of attention that cost needed, these problems were not magically going away. If you purchase all the tools that you still need approaches to automate these things at scale and still not burden the day-to-day practitioners of data. I think that's the nature of the platform keeps changing. It's not about streaming and scale or whatnot, but you always need something which evolves and cuts across all the tools, and it gives you these horizontal superpowers so that the day-to-day practitioners, if you burden everyone with this is how you control cloud costs, it's not going to happen. So that was my learning anyway. I want to get back to the core data learning from James. I think you have some insights there.
Yeah. Sorry, I just found myself daydreaming about Max's question of like, how much easier would my life have been? How many fewer?
Yeah, feel free to riff off of that too.
How many fewer gray hairs would have popped out of my head? There's an interesting corollary there between what was it like for Airbnb to start running their business on AWS instead of having to hire a bunch of infra people to like run MySQL sweaty warehouse farms. I think there's like this new wave of what problems got solved, and then to Sarup's point, what problems still remain. What are the low value problems to solve? I don't see hardly any new companies spinning up and being like, hey, we're going with a on-prem Hadoop stack. Like, I just don't see that, right? It's all Snowflake, it's all BigQuery, it's all even Microsoft data, Azure, data warehouse kind of stuff. Even that stuff feels like it's there. But the problems of that last mile will always be there. How do you make experimentation actually useful for my experiments? How do you make the data sets, the core data sets, whether it's data mesh or whatever paradigm you're working, how do you make those useful for my analysts? How do you take geospatial data and make it useful for the questions I need to ask and the models I need to build? And I think that going off of Max's question is, if you can abstract away those hard infrastructure and tooling challenges, you are left with that last mile of connecting the business problems to the people who are trying to solve those problems. And I think that's like a much more interesting place to be than like tuning a Hadoop cluster. I don't know. What do you all think?
But building tools is super fun though, right? Like that, or at least that's my thing. Like, I don't want to use tools. I want to build tools. Maybe then it's like you join like a company like one of ours, right? Like if you're a tool builder, you join the places where the tools are made. But practitioner is also really cool. You get to solve like real business problem with, with people.
Everyone on this call knows there's still some people deciding to build in-house, despite the alternatives now. It definitely still happens.
Just to be clear, I want to like temper the enthusiasm a little bit. I think we used to worry about shuffles and whatnot in Hadoop. I think now you have to look at spill percentage on Snowflake and see if you have to move it to an extra large warehouse. Those problems don't go away, man. I think just they don't, as you do more demanding things, they just don't go away. Anyway, back to learnings in the modern data stack. Lindsay, just want to kind of get your take on it too. Like if someone has a starter pack, as it were, what are your learnings in terms of what we should be doing as an industry?
I mean, honestly, I'm so on board with what's already been said, right? It's such a provocative question. And, it's sort of like the hierarchy of needs, right? Like the needs that are served now are more easily served. They're not without challenge, as you note. Yeah, I'm a big fan of I mean, it's like what, one of our value props as a company is like, and many of the like dev tool spaces, right? It's like, let us do this really hard thing so that you guys can focus on, the things that get you really excited or bringing your business money. Now, I think there's a separate question around, it's not creativity per se, but I think there's a lot of magic in like good analysts and good data scientists. And like, I'm very intrigued about like, how do you find those people? How do you grow those people, right? The people who make, whether it's they have magical insights or they run experiments that like change the surface of your product, right? Like that to me is like, the MDS doesn't really solve that at all, right? We joke at my director of data science, and I joke about how like, oh man, sometimes our customers are not as creative as we want them to be, right? Because they're worrying about a million things, but like, that's the side of data I've always been really, really like intrigued by and really excited about, which, hopefully we're facilitating, but it's that like very creative side of it. So I don't know.
Who's going to build the data university company? So we had spin up for all the tools and initiatives, except for data university. I think we need to really democratize data. Like we need to educate, right? Like I think that's a really big thing. If we had like really good, not training program, but like a list, training people on the modern data stack, on the practices that people use today, on delivering business value, joining a company and being just a powerful person with like analytical skills and tools, like that would be really great for, the industry in general.
Well, and I think, there's a rise in, sorry, one more thing here. There's a rise, I don't know if you all have noticed, in this role of the product engineer, which is sort of what Che was talking about before, right? It's like, it's not like a back end, front end. It's like an engineer who, their primary concern is the product, right? And like how they contribute to that. I don't know a data science version of that, right? Like there should be a data science version, like a product data scientist, right? And as James suggested, I do think Insight Data Science helped a lot there. I'm a grad, so a bit biased, but yeah.
All right, I think we're almost at time, but I do want to just go around and get your take on what your outlook is. We are in the modern data stack era, and what challenges remain, and what do you foresee happening in the next 3-4 years? And you can also pitch your product in terms of how you're addressing those things. So Che, I'll just start with you again.
Yeah, I think the type of, I'm repeating myself a little bit. I think the type of data teams that exist out there right now just don't look a lot like the Airbnb data teams. And part of that is that we had a lot of natural advantages, including capital and a business model that lends itself to certain types of data. And we also were able to hire incredible talent. You know, not everyone gets to pick off the cream of the crop from Facebook or whatever. And so I think right now we have a lot of people who can do the data modeling, create, you know, manifestations of what a purchase is or whatever. But I don't think they necessarily have as much of a theory of change of like, you know, what happens, like how do you make metrics and data really drive impact at the company? And I think the model is sort of changing a little bit where like, you know, I have this like very pithy statement that's like, I think it's funny that we call them data scientists when I think today, data scientists and product managers, because I think in today's world, we have like product scientists and data managers. Like it's kind of like all very data modeling stuff. And then you just kind of plug it into other things. And then the whole rest of the org has analytical people. And it doesn't matter if they know SQL or not, or tables or whatever. Like it's just like the entire analytical question asking curiosity research agenda is going to separate from the, you know, database modeling, you know, table manifestation stuff. So that's my current theory.
Cool. I'll shuffle it up a little bit, James. Let's go with you next.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So where is this all going? The toolkits that I see most commonly are meant to help abstract some of those problems. There are such phenomenally smart, talented people at these little tiny companies that I've never heard of, or maybe aren't even, you know, in that echelon of like top Silicon Valley things, but there are some really, really smart people out there trying to make best use of tools and best use of data. Where is this all going? I think that I would give a +1 to what Max said earlier, which is I really believe that for most companies, smaller companies, can you stay centralized on the data management as long as possible, right? Just keep somebody whose job it is to make sure that the data sets that exist are tight, that are useful, and are helping to actually empower those people making decisions based on data, analyzing the data, finding insights, and becoming persuasive sort of business partners on the analytics side. Keep that stuff centralized. Keep the tight reins on that high quality data as long as you can. Empower people and finish that last mile of enablement and teaching and training, and make sure that the tools are driving real business value. I mean, that feels like kind of generic advice, but if the modern data stack is about abstracting those hard problems that we faced 6 years ago, 7 years ago, making those now tools that you can manage and manipulate instead of having to build stuff from scratch, that feels like the direction that we're all headed.
Right, Max?
All right. There's this new term I like to use, as I call it data native companies. So we use the term like digital native or like cloud native companies, the companies that were born after AWS, you know, kind of started existing. And that, I think, as the stack and the foundation changes, it fundamentally changes the way that companies operate and the way that teams and specialization and how teams operate. So I think it's interesting to look into data native companies and what they do. So we see a lot of Fivetran, DBT, Airflow coming in a little bit later, because like you can go quite a long way with DBT. Preset, superset, you know, for the visualization layer. So for us, we're like simple visualization, straightforward visualization on top of your data warehouse. The data warehouse is like BigQuery, Snowflake's gonna, you know, probably win the market there. Now, like for the companies that are just born as it's super empowering. You can set up these services like so quickly, including things like high touch, Fivetran, BigQuery. Like I could set it up for a new company, you know, in a day, you know, just create these accounts, connect them, make them work. So how does that inform how teams are working? So I think data modeling is still like a really important thing and a lost art a little bit. Like good data modeling is still very, very important. And whether you do it in DBT, Airflow, or whatever framework you've built, or cron jobs, like creating, like, you know, treating this as a craft and really modeling and organizing your data with pretty labels or with like, you know, good naming, good structure, good combination dimension, good amount of like normalization, denormalization is like super, super key. And I think there's still going to be like mountains of SQL, like people like, writing tons and tons of SQL. I think people decided that data pipelines are largely going to be, expressed as SQL. So that kind of sucks. I don't like the idea of like mountains of SQL, but at the same time, it works, and there's a lot of value that's getting created there. And then in terms of like longer term and like the crystal ball, like where I would look at more parallels with the software engineering world and the DevOps movement getting drawn over time. So that means like data ops is emerging in the footsteps of DevOps, and there's a lot of patterns there around like managing stuff as code and a lot of CI/CD. So I think CI/CD for data, a lot of data quality stuff, similar to like quality infrastructure and like stuff we have on the software engineering side, is going to keep like catching up on software engineering. I think like one thing I think we've assumed in the past that you would just have like a handful of things and tools and practices and framework on the data world. Like if I could just add like these 3 things, then I'm set. That's not this way on the software engineering world. Like we really embrace the diversity there. Like how many languages, like programming languages exist? And does anyone question like, oh my God, I can't believe there's a new programming language? No, there are dozens, and there's probably dozens of languages getting born every day. There's tons of libraries, tons of framework, tons of tools. So I think in the data world, we're going to start to accept too that there's going to be like this mesh and network of tools. And we're going to stop thinking that one person with one tool, like some guy or some lady with Informatica, in the corner of the office can solve all the data problems along with like Power BI or whatever it is, right? Like we're going to understand that we need all sorts of frameworks, tools, libraries, roles too, right? Like it won't just be like data engineers and data scientists. Like we're going to have more and more data roles, more tools, more diversity to solve all the problems we have.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I really like what Max was saying about software engineering practices coming over data modeling, right? Like I think we can all agree that's particularly for the users of creators of data products, right? Being able to rely on consistency and things like that. But one thing I get really excited about is people, I think, are like pushing back, and this is probably related to Max's comment, but like not as many people are taking no as an answer. And by that, I mean, like, I remember when I was like learning pandas, which was like on the job at Airbnb, and pandas, I hate it, right? Like pandas doesn't make, like, I can never wrap my head around the mental model of pandas, but it was sort of like, well, SQL won't work. So, you got to use this. And, I see so many more people, and it could be because I'm like in a founder community now, right? Talking to all of you guys, but like, it's like people are so much more creative about the solutions that they want. And they dream a little bit differently. It's like, this thing doesn't work. We don't have to build it, right? Or we can, but like someone else can build it and where you can find new solutions. And I don't know, I'm really inspired by that, by the idea that like a lot of things that I just took as status quo, 5 years ago, 6 years ago at Airbnb, are being updated and changed. And, why shouldn't I be able to jump between SQL and Python in an analytic notebook if I know when to use which, right? Like we're seeing, obviously, that being done with Hex. So yeah, overall, I'm super excited. I'm excited that folks like, have high standards and high hopes, and I don't know, continue to get funded for these crazy ideas that we all have, right? It's great.
Cool. I'll kind of make my own observations, and then we'll just end with some fun facts, I guess. So in terms of how I see it, first of all, I'm super excited that the budgets are just growing, right? No one resists data related value questions these days. The budgets are just growing. It's good for all of us. I think decentralization is here to stay. No matter how much we fight it, the central teams are not going to get funded as much. We won't see the 50, 100% headcount data platform teams that used to exist. That's my prediction, that they have to make do with less, but there'll always be a central team for central concerns. But their role is going to change into more of advisory and governance and that type of thing. And as people pointed out already, like workload, concurrency, all these concerns are gone now. Like Snowflake, BigQuery, they've solved those things for the most part. But I think the horizontal concerns, I actually don't believe that consolidation will happen. I think the fragmentation is here to stay. There is the Databricks of the world. There's Snowflake, there's BigQuery, there's Looker, there's Preset. This is the world we're going to live in, I think. And I think there'll always be a little bit of consolidation, but followed quickly by fragmentation. But I think the concerns around how to achieve consistency amidst all of this, how do you address things like compliance, how do you address things like cost, how do you address these things are not going to go away. So you actually need something that sits on top in a much more loose fitting way, not in a taking control way, but almost like as an overlay on top of all these tools, I think is important. And I think finally, just in terms of all the things that you folks mentioned already, build, test, deploy, I just think more will be demanded from the analytics engineer of today in terms of rigor. And even the end product manager, more will be demanded in terms of actually deriving value. I think people kind of got away with not being great at data in the past, but I think that's with the growing budgets and actually to justify that, I think you will see that more will be demanded from the people there. So that's my thoughts. Anyway, with that, let's round out the industry side of this. And I think it'll be good if we can all share like one fun thing happening in our lives right now. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, but Che, why don't you?
Yeah, well, mine's easy. I just had a kid 2 weeks ago, so that's a lay up to that question. So yeah, I'm on parental leave. I'm excited to. It's great to catch up with y'all while I'm here. On that note, I also am gonna have to leave to daycare to pick up my other kid. So great talking to y'all.
See you, Max, go for it.
So for me with the pandemic, decided to relocate to Tahoe back in December. So I left the Bay Area and we decided to go live in the woods a little bit more, like a tighter, smaller community. And it's been super great. Like I'm looking at the lake, it's not too far from me. I could be on a kayak in 10 minutes. It might be, though it is a little cloudy now, but it's kind of interesting to be empowered to work from anywhere now. And it's very, people have talked a lot about this, and it's very, I think it is transformative for all the information workers and our professions. So yeah, a reminder to everyone else that you can take advantage of that. You can probably work out of anywhere now. What would you rather be next week, next month, next year? Cool stuff.
Lindsay.
Yeah, well, I don't know how many of you were still at Airbnb. It might have just been you, Swaroop, but right before I left, I got hit by a car when I was riding my bike and broke my leg. And biking was always one of my favorite activities. And it took a while for me to get back on a bike, but bought a road bike a couple months ago, and I'm so glad that I've been able to do that and not let a pretty bad injury stop me. So it's been super exciting to just ride around the bay, go up to Sonoma. I've lots of riding plans this summer.
Nice. Mr. Mayfield.
Let's see. After dodging COVID for 2.5 years, finally caught it. Ripped through my whole family. And now the 2-year-old is the last one recovering. And I think his fever is all better, and he's just starting to not be a fussy little mess. And that is a very nice thing in my life.
That is some kind of a fun story. Okay. All right. I'll conclude this. I am gotten back to practicing my Indian classical music amidst all the startup craziness. I used to do that back in the day, but somehow I've gotten back to it. Otherwise, I was kind of going crazy with the nonstop startup grind. So that's what's happening in my life. It's been amazing connecting with you all again. I think, we can keep talking all day. I think we should do a part 2 based on all the themes that came here. But for now, thanks for taking the time, all of you.